It is right at 4 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. I am Shannon Egan. I'm the director of the Schmucker Art Gallery, and we are all super used to Zoom now. So it's nice to see faces and names popping up on my screen. First of all, I'm just going to introduce Professor Austin Stiegemeier, who is the assistant professor of art at Gettysburg College and who supervised the Capstone projects in the gallery this year. As you all probably know, normally we would be gathering in the gallery to celebrate the seniors' accomplishments, to see their incredible installation. But of course, with the pandemic, Zoom is the next best thing. I just want to say a couple of thanks. One is to Leslie Castile for all of her help, and also for Derek Rosenberry too for his assistance in getting the students prepped and ready for the Capstone exhibition. If you are on campus, if you're a current Gettysburg College student, staff, or faculty, the gallery is open, and I encourage you to come in and see the students' fantastic work. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4, and we will be open through graduation day, through May 17th. So now I am going to just a couple of quick reminders. One is that this is being recorded. Two, we will have some time for questions and answers at the end, but feel free to type any questions or comments into the chat box. Austin and I will help moderate those questions at the end. And finally, please join me in congratulating all of our seniors, and I'll turn it over to Austin. So thanks for coming. So this is the image that Austin is going to be starting with. And I am excited, and just please, like Kailey or Zoe or someone, just sort of let me know if you see, if you can see the others hopping back on. But this is Marz Smeltzer's work in the project space, and as you can see, we have Alexis Bourne, Brendle, Kevin Isky, Zoey Landau, Elise Quick, Marz Smeltzer, and Kailey White. And I just want to note too, all of these photos were taken by May Lonergan, who's a current student and senior. So as you walk into the gallery, this is what you would see. We have Autumn's paintings on the left, the wall to the left, and these are Lexie's sculptures on the right. We'll just sort of pretend we're walking through the gallery waiting for everybody to come back in. Elise's ceramics in the foreground, and Kailey's work on the wall behind. And then as you kind of turn around, you can see more of Elise's ceramics. And then peeking above, this is Kailey's yearbook. Peeking behind Kailey's yearbook are Zoe's works. Just sort of get another view around here, a nice detail of Elise's work in the foreground. Okay, Austin is back.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to the Capstone 2021 Studio Arts Senior Seminar Artist Talks. I'm Austin Stiegemeier, as Shannon mentioned, and I prefer he, him pronouns. I'm assistant professor of painting here at the college, and today it's my pleasure to share with you all the remarkable capstone projects of this year's 7 graduating seniors that include Alexis Bourne, Brendle, Kevin Isky, Zoey Landau, Marz Smeltzer, Elise Quick, and Kailey White. Before we get started with the talks, I just want to first acknowledge the hard work and perseverance of each of my students this year. It goes without saying, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot this year, that the global pandemic has posed so many monumental challenges for us in academics. And for studio art students, this year has been no easy task. To be a practicing studio artist requires physical presence and a connection in so many ways. So I highly encourage anyone who's able to visit Schmucker Art Gallery in person, if you haven't already, and witness the firsthand the quality of our students' artistic achievements. Lastly, I just want to recognize that I'm honored to have had the opportunity to work with this group of talented and engaged young artists. And I want to tell each of them how proud of them I am for rising to the occasion this year and especially today. So thank you very much all for joining us. I'm going to share my presentation. And first we have, can everybody see this? Okay, first up, I'm pleased to present Kailey White.
Hi, everyone. Okay, is it okay if I just start? Are we timing? Just go? Okay, cool.
Go ahead, you've got the floor.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kailey White, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I study studio art at Gettysburg, but I've focused my studies to include business and graphic design. The inspiration for my capstone, you can change it if you want. The inspiration for my capstone came to me when I was unpacking my suitcase after being sent home early from Copenhagen, Denmark last spring semester. I came across a bin of my old yearbooks, and the one that drew my attention the most was from first grade, not only because it's in black and white, and what's in black and white anymore, and also because, as you can see, it is covered in red marker from me defacing my fellow classmates. So that rather immature act is what grew to be the concept behind my capstone. You can go ahead and change to the next slide. The concept behind my capstone is all about healing your inner child, which in sum means that through my capstone, I address the wounds from my childhood that affect me in the present. At the beginning of the semester, I found myself aligning a lot with my younger self when I experienced abrupt traumatic change caused by the pandemic. Go ahead and change it. The first piece in my capstone is titled A Letter to My Younger Self. This piece is a letter from my present day self to my past self who is about to unknowingly experience trauma. It is headshots of me acting out the emotions depicted in my main piece, the yearbook, which we'll talk about later. Go ahead and switch it. And by acting out these emotions, I show how easily it is to manipulate your outer shell to hide how you're actually feeling on the inside. I wrote directly on the photos with red marker because it mimics the action of signing a physical yearbook, and it's a bit of karma because I'm literally defacing myself now. Go ahead and change it. I began my main piece, the yearbook, by taking headshots that were reminiscent of my sorority composites because it's my latest memory of getting my portrait taken. I organized a grid of 25 headshots, each depicting a different emotion. There are both positive and negative emotions shown to depict the wide range of emotions I have felt throughout the past year. Each photo is in black and white and drawn on with acrylic paint pen except for the central headshot. The exclusive color palette mimics the limited color options found within a box of children markers, while the added doodles mimic a 2D sticker. I also use the motif of hands to represent the idea of forcing myself to challenge my emotions and not hide them inside. Each headshot has a sense of beauty, even if it's depicting a negative emotion. This is intentionally done because I personally am quite scared of my own mind, and seeing these emotions depicted rather cheerfully makes them a lot less scary to face. Additionally, I chose to depict each emotion in a rather generalized manner so that everyone can relate to it. However, there are personalizations. And since you all can't be in the gallery today, I'm actually going to introduce to you all of the emotions. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Here we have trustworthy, romantic, humorous, and used. Next slide. Infectious, drained, embarrassed, and quiet. Next slide. Intelligent, upset, flirty, and creative. And intelligence, which is the top left one, is actually a good example of the personalizations I was talking about, because I'm going to spill the tea really quick and expose myself. I don't know my times tables, and it's been an issue every year of middle school and high school. So to solve math equations, I would use dots to count. So I added that into my headshot. Go ahead and change the slide. So then we have beautiful, needy, selfless, and relaxed. Next. And last we have invisible, broken, foolish, and happy. Go ahead and switch it. Oh, wait. Okay, go ahead and switch it again. Okay, The last piece of my capstone is the book I designed. I chose to design a hardcover book that a viewer can physically flip through, further relating to the inspiration taken from my original elementary school yearbook. Go ahead and switch the slide. As you can see, I didn't put the names of the emotions under the gallery because I wanted the viewer to be able to investigate their own mind. And last thing I have is that I want to stress the importance of not suffering in silence when it comes to mental health, especially during this unprecedented time. So please, if you need help, seek help. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kailey. Up next, we have Alexis Bourne.
Hello. Okay. So I'm Lexi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. You can do the next slide. For my capstone, I decided to make art that explores interiors and exteriors. This idea was inspired by my perception of people's behaviors. I find that people try to suppress their feelings and personalities to be more palatable to others. I know I certainly have done this, and with COVID, this idea of suppressing your insides feels especially relevant. This past year internally, I felt like a complete mess with a mix of personal losses and general anxiety of the state of the world. It's been intense, to say the least. But the craziest thing to me is how there was still this expectation that we had to go around as if everything was normal and we were used to it. Oh, you can do the next slide. So this is a shot of my art from another perspective. So I decided to make sculptures with intricate wire insides to represent our complex interiors, and then covered them with different materials to represent our exteriors. While picking materials, I tried to use the most accessible things as possible, especially because I started making works for the capstone at home. And you can show the next slide. Okay. All of the interiors are made of wire, mostly aluminum wire with varying gauges and colors. I decided to make the interiors out of wire because I can manipulate the wire quite easily. You can show the next slide. I could also tie wires together to get an entangled look, which I felt was a great representation of an interior in turmoil. Hence why a lot of the titles for my work reference being tied up, such as twisted, entwined, entangled, etc. And the first material I started experimenting with to create the exteriors was tissue paper. It was easy to access and it covered the wire nicely without completely obscuring it. The tissue paper also doesn't lay flat. There's still texture, which I liked because our exteriors are still interesting, even if they're not our unfiltered selves. So what I do is I would get a spray adhesive and spray it onto the wire and then stick the tissue paper onto the wire. You can, next slide. So then as I was using the tissue paper, I started to think about letting the wire interiors be seen. So I experimented with partially covering the wire with tissue paper, letting the wire be exposed, as you can see here. Thought of it as if your interior could finally be revealed. Next slide. And those are some of my first projects that I made covering with tissue paper. Next slide. And I also wanted to experiment with different materials for the exteriors. I still want to try and have the wire exposed. So I wanted a material that was semi-transparent. So I decided to use the sheer fabric that shows the wire interior. And while making the sculpture, I knew that the wire would be visible. So I purposefully made the wire resemble a circulatory system to emphasize.
Is everybody still here?
Yeah, I think it's just Lexi.
Okay. Maybe we wait a minute and see if she comes back.
It looks like Lexi is on campus too, so maybe the wind has knocked out the internet again.
Well, should we go to the next artist? Okay. Up next, I'm pleased to present Zoey Landau.
Hi, I'm Zoey Landau. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a biology and art studio double major. Next slide, please. For my capstone, I've created narrative mixed media sculptures based around the themes of interconnectivity, nature, and life experience. I'm driven to art by the desire to connect with others, and I combine the processes affiliated with tactile materials such as clay and fabric. Next photo, please. The first piece I'd like to show you is called Maiden. In this series, I used wax dipped fabrics to create a heavy feeling sculpture and photographed it in different places to give it human-like qualities and a narrative story for the viewer to follow. The photographs are meant to ask the viewer where they feel is a comfortable or correct place for the drying rack to be and where is not. And the name for this piece is both a reference to the portrayal of women in society and a turn on the traditional British name for a clothes drying rack, which is a maiden. Next photo, please. And then those are some of the photographs hanging behind the sculpture. Next slide, please. In my next piece called Sonder, I used unfired ceramic donut forms of varying shapes, sizes, and patterns to represent the fragility and uniqueness of individual lives. I then arranged them over top of a dense fabric to represent the subtle woven interconnectivity between the lives of people all around us. The word Sonder is a relatively new word, and it originally took root on the online media site called Tumblr. I'm sure some of you are familiar. And Sonder's defined as the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. Next photo, please. That's a detail shot for you. Next photo. And my final series called Merry-Go-Round of Life is about human connection with nature and the world around us. It contains monolithic rockwork in the Japanese iwagumi style of aquascaping and glazed donuts covered in plant life to question the viewer's perception of himself with regard to their impact on the natural world. The donut forms here are sturdy and create archways that intermix with the life around them. My process for these pieces was unique from the rest, and I found solace in planting and growing the life within. Next photo, please. I hope the viewer is able to connect with the calming energy presented before them and reflect on their own life connections and connections to nature. These scapes are small, but for the dwarf shrimp that live within them, they are really quite vast. I invite the viewer to question how they would perceive themselves fitting into this space. This work is heavily influenced by my major in biology, and much of my knowledge of aquatic plants and water chemistry stems from my educational experience. The name Merry-Go-Round of Life comes from a love story called Howl's Moving Castle by Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli. Next photo, please. You can go to the next one after that too. The animation for this story opens a window into a world polluted by war, where love ultimately connects the protagonists to create peace and harmony. Next photo. And that's my work.
Thank you very much, Zoey. Up next, I'm pleased to present Marz Smeltzer. And could I just remind people to silence cell phones? There's somebody's, I don't know if other people are hearing that, but it sounds like a text message is coming in. Up next, we have Marz Smeltzer.
Hi, yeah, I'm Marz Smeltzer. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm pleased to present my work to you, even if I am zooming in from my phone because the power went out. So, you know, things happen. Next slide. These first couple photos are just going to be like an overview of the gallery because I know not everyone is going to be able to stop by because it is restricted to just students on campus. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so these first couple slides are just an overview of the room. My work this year has really been focused on themes of trans embodiment. As a trans person, I have been doing obviously a lot of introspection, a lot of consideration of my own experiences, but also more broadly thinking about the way that myself and other trans people are perceived. And I approached this broadly through the lens of classical sculpture and iconography, and with a specific interest in how we perceive beauty and who gets to decide what and who are considered beautiful. Next slide. This first wall is a series of collages which I created while we were in like semi-quarantine last semester. So these were mostly created in my room. So they were all created in my sketchbook, and it was a kind of a new medium for me. So they're layers of paper and paint and ink, and they are all either explicitly referencing or alluding to classical sculpture. Next slide, please. These are prints I made more recently, again with a similar theme of classical sculpture, referencing here sculpture of Dionysus and a sculpture of the Three Graces. Next slide. These three are on the third wall. These are in a similar style to the initial collage work, but with more of an introspective bent. These are all to some extent self-portraiture, dealing with my personal experiences more specifically. And next slide. These are also prints, and the reason that I chose to display them with the initial blocks is to sort of emphasize the process of printmaking and sort of the tactile, embodied nature of the work. Next slide. To sort of zoom in on a couple works, this work titled "What Are Your Skills" is actually was actually modeled by one of my friends, a trans man who recently got top surgery, which was and this piece is kind of celebrating that achievement and again referencing those classical forms and like palettes. I'm addressing them in a similar fashion to the other more explicit sculptural references, with the partial form and the color palette, but the figure is obviously modern. And I just wanted to I wanted to present that in a way that was sort of romanticizing almost, celebrating trans joy and trans beauty. Next slide, please. This selection is sort of to focus more on the prints of Dionysus, again with the block to sort of emphasize the process. I chose this sculpture of Dionysus to reference because as a mythic figure, Dionysus actually has a lot that can be tied to a specifically transmasculine experience. As the child of the god Zeus and a mortal woman, he was a demigod. And Zeus's wife Hera was very unhappy with this, and so his mother disguised him as a girl for the first few years of his life, and it wasn't until he came into his own identity as a god that he was able to embrace his masculinity, which is a theme that I like deeply resonates with me. And I feel is broadly relevant to, you know, transmasculine identity specifically. But and next slide. These last two slides are again, these are more self-portrait, and you can go to the next slide as well. These are titled respectively estradiol and progestin because they're both referencing my struggles with endometriosis and sort of the experiences that I've had as a transmasculine person who's dealing with what is traditionally considered like a women's disease. And the titles that I chose for these specifically estradiol and progestin refer to hormones that are frequently used in hormonal birth control, which is a traditional treatment plan for endometriosis, but they're also commonly found in feminizing hormone replacement therapy, which is, it's something that I sort of have to square in my daily life a bit. It's something that I've thought about a lot. And they sort of address kind of both the distress and the strength that I pull from, you know, my chronic illness and my trans identity. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming to this presentation, pardon me, even if things are a little wild. I hope if you can come to the gallery that you do, and if not, thank you so much for coming to the talks. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Marz. Up next, we have Autumn Brendle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Brendle. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I study both studio art and psychology here at Gettysburg College. You can click to the next slide. So my capstone work is a contemporary take on the memento mori motif and vanitas paintings. While historically such paintings are meant to be grim reminders that the good things in life will not last, my works emphasize the importance of making the most of life. I explore a number of ideas inspired by philosophy, psychology, poetry, and music to get a better sense of how humanity has viewed death throughout time. You can click to the next slide. So this first piece in my series is called The Lively Skulls of Paris. And it was a quick experimental piece based off of my experience visiting the Paris catacombs, which is a surprisingly touristy place. Reflecting on this experience got me thinking about cultural fascinations with death. You can click to the next slide. The following pieces were all inspired by written or musical works of art. So this first piece, called Montaigne's Garden, was inspired by an essay by the philosopher Montaigne. He believed that in order to motivate ourselves to live fulfilling lives, death should be in our constant thoughts. You can click to the next slide. This piece, called Sonnet 18, is based off of the Shakespearean poem of the same name. And like Shakespeare's poem, this work focuses on the theme of eternal life through art. You can click to the next slide. And this piece, the one in the center, gets its title from the song Don't Fear the Reaper, and it has a similar theme of love lasting long after death. You can click to the next slide. This piece is called The Bright Side of Death, and the title is sort of a spin-off of the Monty Python song, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. And so while bubbles were traditionally symbolic of life's grim fragility, this piece looks on the bright side and elects to see life's fragility as a gift. You can click to the next slide. I also created a number of pieces inspired by psychological concepts. So these three works are based on stages from the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of dying model, which is similar to the 5 stages of grief. So on the bottom left is denial, and denial is characterized by the refusal to acknowledge one's impending death. Top left is depression, which is characterized by feelings of numbness and grief. And on the right is acceptance, which is the final stage, and it's defined by the quiet expectation of death's arrival. And this last stage is only reached by a few people, but it is the most important for fully appreciating a life well lived. You can click to the next slide. So this piece is called The Moment, and it's a rather simple piece that characterizes the moment of death. This is demonstrated through photographs from my own life collaged into a tiny 4x4-inch frame, symbolizing a lifetime of memories condensed into a single moment. You can click to the next slide. So these last few pieces are all inspired by social issues. This one is called What Unites Us, and it characterizes death as the great equalizer. No one is above death, and no one is naturally superior to another. You can click to the next slide. On the opposite end, this piece called Humanity Tips the Scale acknowledges that the amount of time we have on Earth can vary based on things such as our race, sexuality, and socioeconomic status. You can click to the next slide. This piece is called Too Soon, and it's based off of a similar concept, focusing on gun violence, which has been an issue in recent times. And so overall, these last few pieces serve as inspiration to live a fulfilling life through helping others and addressing systemic inequalities. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Autumn. Next, we have Elise Quick.
You can click to the next slide. Okay. Hi, I'm Elise. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a studio art history double major and an environmental studies minor. My art practice explores the idea of broken or disjointed parts that come together to complete and give meaning to the work. In this body of work, I do this by breaking the work and putting it back together as part of the creating process. The work is meant to reflect and react to the way humans grow and change through their life and how humans deal with emotions of feeling broken, but it shows that they are still able to overcome their challenges. Next slide. My work connects to the idea of traditional Japanese style kintsugi, which is the repairing of broken ceramics with gold. The use of gold shows that even when an individual sees themselves as broken, their growth is beautiful and makes them who they are. Next slide. This process has multiple steps after just creating and glazing the ceramic work. After the work was glazed, I would hammer them until they broke into pieces. And then once all the pieces were broken, I would either use the original style of kintsugi by taking Hushuru, which is a Japanese tree lacquer, and mixing it with flour to create a paste. This paste would then be used like glue to stick the pieces back together and let it dry. Because it takes a long time for this to dry, for some of the larger works, I would use epoxy glue to speed up the drying process. Once the glue was dry, I would take more of the tree lacquer and paint thin lines over top of the cracks. And once those were partially dry or tacky, I would dust gold powder over top of the lines. Next slide. The woman and child vessels show the idea of how much humans grow and change. Both the child and woman are representative of the same person, the small figure as the child and the larger figure as them grown up. Next slide. Can you go to the slide of the child? Thank you. The child is able to look up to their older selves and see how much they are going to grow and overcome, being able to see that even though they're going to go through a lot, they are going to end up beautiful. Can you go to the other picture of the child now? Thank you. The child has a few small breaks in their hands and feet to show how small children feel when they have problems and are struggling, but these problems are normally small and easily resolved, much like how when a child runs into things and hurts themselves and then are totally fine 2 minutes later. Now, can you go to the woman one? Thank you. In comparison to the child, the woman has many breaks all over her body. Some of them are small, similar to the child's breaks, but some are also larger chunks, which are to show more difficult problems that they have gone through that take more time to heal from. Can you go to the last slide now, please? Thank you. This group of 5 is called the canopic jars of aging. It is a group of 5 jars with the center jar showing a young girl on the right and her as an older girl on the left, with a break filled with gold down the middle separating the two of them. The image of the girl is based off my younger sister. The image of on the right was based off an image I took of her when she was around 5, and she is now finishing her junior year of high school this year, which is what is represented on the left, though the photo of her is not from a reference of her because she would not send me a photo in the position I wanted her to be in for the painting. The group of 5 also loosely resembles the idea of the Egyptian canopic jars that are used in the mummification process. In mummification, the jars would each hold a different organ of the person that was being mummified that they would take with them into the afterlife. Instead of organs, my jars represent the memories and experiences you gain as you go through life. And that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Elise. And finally, I'm pleased to present Kevin Isky.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kevin Isky, and I pursued painting for my capstone work. If you want to go to the next slide. So to give you some background, over the course of the ongoing pandemic, I had ample time to reflect on past experiences. Spending time alone away from others provided me the opportunity to remember things that I'd otherwise forgotten were locked away in the back of my mind. I felt that I treated my rediscovered memories with a particular fondness, beauty, or humor. My work provides a visuality to those memories, be they something I saw, a conversation I had, or something that I read. Next slide, please. In this image, you see all my paint. Oh wait, go back to the last slide, please. Thank you. In this image, you see all my paintings, and they are specifically ordered from left to right. Next slide, please. The first painting is called Frontispiece, and it functions the way a frontispiece would, as the statement image in the beginning of a catalog. I chose a passage from Genesis explaining how God created all the creatures of the earth and brought them to Adam to be named. I see myself kind of like Adam. I'm giving a name or validity to my memories. Next slide, please. The latter 5 paintings are titled Tabula 1, Tabula 2, Tabula 3, and so forth up to Tabula 5. To further parallel my series to the early catalogs of the 17th and 18th century, when naturalists were illustrating all the plants and animals of the New World. My first class here as a freshman was actually learning just about that, about art and science in the Renaissance. And it was fitting for me to return to that material and try to give form to memories in place of organisms. Additionally, the field of gesso behind each painted image acts simultaneously as a page as well as a representation of the mind. I see the mind as this big white void that's always shifting, kind of like clouds if you were to look up in the sky. Next slide, please. So I limited myself to only using black and white oil and acrylic paint. To me, I was drawing back to early printing processes when the printed image had no color, To get color, a colorist would have to go in afterwards and provide it. I don't want to be the colorist. I don't want to nuance my work with any of the connotations that color can provide. I'd prefer to leave it up to the viewer to provide their own color and interpret a story or interpret an image however they see fit. Next slide, please. This one is just a detail of a painting. You can go on to the next slide too. And you can go on to the next one. So tabula 1 here is about when I remembered my father telling me how much I would have loved to meet my great-grandfather. But unfortunately, he died in the 1960s, a long time ago, from lung complications after being gassed by the Germans in World War I. And I decided that I really liked the story, but I didn't want to write any of the conversation like I did on the other paintings, because it would eliminate that feeling of this burning plane that's up there all by itself, falling down. So, but I got the inspiration from the image from reading a comic book, and I decided it was perfect and beautiful, and it reminded myself of my conversation with my father about my great-grandfather. Next slide, please. This tabula 2 presents a moment when one of my friends, who's 60 plus years my senior, he told me why he loves college, because, and he says this, they stay the same age. In a private moment, this person I greatly respect said something that many people would probably find objectionable or problematic. To some, it could be funny, to others, probably offensive, but it's not for me to cast a certain light on that. I'd rather leave it up to you. Next slide, please. Tabula 3 is an overturned chair, not necessarily one that's just floating on its side. For this one, I remembered a conversation I had with my cousin just after our other cousin overdosed on heroin. It's a particularly sad story. He died, but the way that I remember it being told and how the conversation went, there's an element of personality and humor in what my cousin said. And I thought, it was awesome. It was great. Next slide, please. In this painting, I remembered a former boss of mine from a few years ago who was boasting about a time that he may or may not have killed a man back when he used to run a strip club back in the 1980s. And well, so in case you can't read all of it, the story goes that this guy came into his club, was harassing his female employees, and he beat the guy up, threw him in a dumpster, except within a few hours after that, the garbage truck came, and this guy was so beat up that, my boss Bob doesn't know if he ever got out. But that's the story. And, once again, I thought it was hilarious. I thought there was a lot of personality to it. I thought it was beautiful, and I remembered it with a particular fondness, the way that he said everything. Last slide, please. So lastly, I painted a lost cat poster on a telephone pole next to a poem that I had wrote years earlier. The cat poster comes from one day when I was walking down Carlisle Street here in Gettysburg, and someone posted that they lost their orange cat. I forget its name. I think it was Todd. And in the poem, which unfortunately it's kind of unreadable from this image, I think, but it's about an unrequited love and how the feeling of it being hard to let go, kind of like losing your cat. I felt they paired well together. My hope is that the viewer will walk away from my work and try to remember memories they had and haven't thought of in a long time, and try to notice the things that are humorous or beautiful or sad about those experiences. Too often we experience something and only to be quickly forgotten and replaced because, we live in such a fast-paced society. Well, thank you. This has been my capstone.
All right, thank you so much, Kevin. Now, thank you. So now we'd like to open it up for question and answer period. I think we still have 10, 15 minutes. If anybody would like to, you can, we welcome you to just hop on.
Austin, do you want Lexi to finish presenting?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for reminding me of that. Do we have Lexi back?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay, let me get to, let me get back to your slide.
I think we were like a little bit past that, like the close up on the tall one.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All right. Well, as I just said, that's a close up of the last work, but yeah, we can just go on to the next slide too. Okay, so as like I said, I glued exteriors to the wire sculptures, like tissue paper and fabric. But as I was gluing these exteriors to the wire, I was using these disposable gloves because I didn't want any of the glue to get on my skin. So as I was making these sculptures, I was creating a lot of waste via these plastic gloves, as you can see here, and which honestly made me feel pretty guilty knowing how much of our waste ends up polluting the earth. So I had this idea of putting the gloves on the wire. And I really love this because in order to take off the gloves, I have to turn them inside out so I don't get glue on my skin. And then I kept them inside out as I glued them onto the wire. And what I realized is that there's now a layer of my skin on the outside of the sculpture. So there's the literal layer of my exterior, my skin on the exterior of the sculpture. And the whole point of my capstone is exploring the interior and the exterior. Okay, next slide. And so after using the gloves, I was like, oh, maybe I should explore using more materials that would be considered waste. And I noticed I had some disposable masks lying around. And so I cut them up and you can see that they have these 3 different layers to them. And I use them for the exteriors. And I really liked using masks because they catch your breath. And the breath from inside me, my interior, is now a part of these sculptures. So I have sculptures with my interior and my exterior. And I also really liked using the masks and the gloves because it felt relevant to COVID, because here these objects are used during the pandemic to cover up our bodies for protection. And now I've used them in a way almost to like repress our bodies or our insides. And personally, I felt like because of the pandemic, I've had to repress a lot. Anywho, that's my stuff. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Lexi. So again, yeah, I would like to just welcome anybody to give your comments or to open it up for any questions anybody might have.
Hi, this is to everyone. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting presentation. Now you're sitting back looking at this work. What is the most surprising thing to you about the work that you've made? That's to everybody.
I think mine would be that I came into this having an idea of just having one main project. So I guess seeing everybody having like all of these like different pieces was kind of surprising to me personally, because I came into this like, oh, it has to be like one big project, but it doesn't. It can be whatever you want, literally.
Yeah, not quite the same as what Kailey was touching on, but a lot of my works that ended up being in my final exhibition were initially just sort of explorations on a theme. And I was planning on having a full series of like 10 or 12 prints instead of including the collage. But because of COVID and the printmaking studio on campus being effectively inaccessible. I sort of had to make workarounds, and it helped me sort of hit on a style of work that I haven't really explored before. So that was really interesting, and I think pretty surprising development if you were to ask me what I was planning on doing like even a year ago. But yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Mark.
Did you ask what was the most surprising to us?
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, what was the most surprising thing? I don't that came to you once you'd finished the work, or now you've had a chance to look at it?
It's hard to say that much of it was a surprise, at least for me. I think I tried to plan things out and not leave any room for surprise. The only thing that surprised me is how hard with oil paint and to get it.
Okay, does anybody else of my capstones want to speak to?
I thought it was going to be a lot easier to like break the ceramic works, but the large woman figure did not want to break at all. I spent like an hour just hammering her, and like she didn't want to crack.
Yeah, I would say the most surprising thing to me was that I didn't run out of ideas to explore. I took AP art classes in high school, and you have to do a concentration section, and I would run out of ideas near the end. But for this, I had almost an endless amount of source material to make interesting pieces. So that was a pleasant surprise.
I think the biggest surprise for me was the evolution of my work as I was doing it. Just because I would work a little bit every day and not realize how much I was actually getting done. And then watching like the plants grow in and just everything kind of coming together at the end was a beautiful thing for me. Definitely a surprise.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I decided to use different materials in some way, or that I even thought to use some stuff, like the gloves and the masks. So, because I figured it'd just be something like you could get at an art store, but not. So that was interesting.
I want to jump in and just commend everyone for investigating and sharing some really difficult and personal concerns and experiences, and I think it resulted in really successful, powerful work. So I just wanted to kind of share that I'm very, very impressed with everyone's work.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for sharing. Do I have anybody else that would like to ask a question? I don't see any hands raised.
Oh, that's going on again. I hope if someone has a question, feel free to jump in. I had a question about one about Maiden for Zoey. Could you explain that work in a little bit more detail?
Sure. Any like particular part of it or just a general?
I guess because your titles have such significance, and if you could say a little bit more about how you see the photos and the fabric and the sculpture connecting, and where you took the photos.
Yeah, so with Maiden, it was a study basically on how like society would perceive a woman in different scenarios. So the first picture in the series is of the sculpture sitting next to an empty chair. And it's more of like a comfortable picture because you're seeing a drying rack inside a house, inside like in like a living space. And then the second picture is of the drying rack out on a porch, kind of half in the light, half in the dark of like the shadow of the porch. And that's a little bit less comfortable because you wouldn't expect to see a drying rack outside. But it's still in like a homestead kind of environment, so you're not totally blown away by it. And then the third picture is out in the forest. And it's supposed to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. So that's one level about that piece. And then the other like physical aspect about it, like with the fabrics, they have a very like laden, heavy feeling to them. And that's supposed to represent like the things that build up on a person over their lifetime. And just like that heavy feeling people can get when you're kind of stuck in a role that you have to play. Yeah, and here's the photo. You can see the three pictures in the background a little bit, but yeah. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, thanks. And I have one more question for Marz too. I feel like this is a really fantastic series that you could kind of continue exploring. And again, I found it just beautiful and interesting, and I wanted to know too, I love the connection with, or the exploration of the Greek mythology and trans-masculine identity, and if there were other myths and other, gods and goddesses that you wanted to explore, or that you could kind of see, do more research and do more work about that, if you had more time and more resources.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about like queer identity generally, but I feel like this is specifically not an issue, but this is specifically something that I found with regards to trans-masculinity in the context of like history, is a lot of things that, potentially could have been read as, a trans-masculine identity. And obviously we don't want to ascribe anything to, actual people necessarily without, because everything's in context, obviously. But the thing about trans-masculinity specifically in the context of like history is a lot of it has just been like either actively erased or passively forgotten, because a lot of it ends up being read as like, oh, that was a woman who was acting out, and that was either quashed down at the time, or future scholars sort of reading it not through a trans lens. Obviously there's a lot that I personally can empathize with, relate to. I specifically focused on Dionysus because that was that one felt like the most immediately relevant to the work I was doing. But obviously, I'm sure if I had more time, there's a lot more I could get into. There's just a lot about gender in like ancient Greece and Rome, and it would require more time. Yeah, it's a complicated topic for sure. But yeah, a lot of trans-masculinity has been like erased over the years, and that's not to say that trans-masculine expression didn't exist. It's just that it's been, like I said, it's been ignored or interpreted through lenses that maybe aren't necessarily, definitely not the only ways we could be seeing things, if that, hope that answers your question. A little
Yeah, thank you.
non-specific,
And
but.
no, thanks. I think Tina has a raised hand.
Yeah, I see Tina has raised hand.
If we could squeeze it in, even just one response would be lovely. And the rest of you can hold on to it if you don't have a quick answer. And we can chat about it the next time we have individual conversation. I'm wondering if what things are brewing that you couldn't quite get to, like if college and the pressures of classes and graduation didn't exist and you had a couple more weeks, what thing would you be chasing after?
I think I would probably start experimenting with like video and animation, because I think that if you had like a phone and held it up to like my gallery and like the doodles would move and be animated, that would be pretty cool. So that's what I would do.
I for sure would be doing more prints, hopefully more like multi-layered prints. And ideally, I was hoping to do some 3D work, some ceramics that didn't end up being in the cards, but that was, if I had like another semester, that would be more of my focus.
I wanted to experiment more with the wax dipped fabrics. I wanted to try to take t-shirts or other like personal articles of clothing from people who are in my life and like create like a plastilina mold to lay them over after they're dipped so that it creates like a form of a person inside it, and then have it like be hollow, almost like they're like a remembrance to that person almost.
I just wish I made more paintings. I've got a bunch of canvases that I put gesso on and whatnot, but I don't have nothing else on them yet. So maybe by the end of the semester, I can try to finish them up.
Autumn and Lexi, anybody else want to speak to that?
I still have a lot of, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I still have a lot of gloves left over, so I think I want to try and figure out what to do with those. So yeah, but you can go.
Yeah, I was just going to say I would find more ideas to explore. There's probably an endless amount of songs, poems, philosophical essays, books, movies, etc. about death. So there's plenty of ideas for me to look into.
Paintings. And we didn't hear from Elise yet, did we?
No.
Okay.
The idea that I think would be interesting to like follow what I've done is, instead of making like life-size people, I would like combine them with the idea of my 5 jars and make each of the jars like a person, and like their head would be the little lid for the jar. And then like I would base each of the like the way the person looked. I haven't figured out how I would do this yet, but off of what organ would go into each jar.
Great. Well, it looks like we're a little bit over time, so I don't want to hold us too long. I do want to thank everybody who attended today, and thanks to those of you who engaged with my students and asked questions. And a big thank you to my students. Good work, everybody. And I would like to invite everybody to just give them a big congratulations along with mine on successfully mounting your exhibition and completing your artist talk. So great work, everybody.